Imagine watching your HOA president dial 911 on your wife for changing locks on your own property, then having the audacity to demand the master keys for community safety. This woman actually told the responding officers that my wife was trespassing on HOA property and needed to be arrested immediately. The absolute rage I felt watching Karen Whitfield's manicured finger jab at my wife while she smugly explained how these people don't understand community rules. That metallic taste of pure fury still hits me. What Karen didn't know was that my wife wasn't just some difficult resident. She was Deputy U.S. Marshal Sarah Morrison, and she'd been quietly documenting Karen's $400,000 embezzlement scheme for 3 months. What would you do if your HOA tried to criminally prosecute you for improving your own home? Because when my wife finally flashed her federal badge, Karen's face went white as fresh snow, and our entire neighborhood discovered where their missing dues really went. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I bet you've got HOA horror stories too. My name's Jake Morrison, and at 45, I thought I'd survived enough petty tyrants to last 3 lifetimes. 23 years as an Air Force mechanic taught me how to fix what's broken and spot people who mistake authority for personality. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for Pine Ridge Mountain Community and its self-appointed empress, Karen Whitfield. Sarah and I moved to this Colorado development 2 years ago after inheriting her grandmother's 1960s cabin. Picture this: 847 residents scattered across $2.3 million homes on 2-acre lots, surrounded by national forests so pristine you can smell the pine sap mixing with your morning coffee on the deck. Grandma Morrison built her little cabin back when this was just wilderness, meaning we had grandfathered property rights that predated Karen's precious HOA by 40 years. We invested $180,000 transforming that rustic cabin into our dream retreat. Sarah, my wife of 18 years, works some kind of federal law enforcement job requiring frequent travel. She's always been deliberately vague about details, something about financial investigations and maintaining operational security. Smart woman. Turns out that professional paranoia would save our asses. The morning our nightmare began, I was on the deck watching morning mist roll off the mountains when Sarah emerged, her duty belt creaking that familiar leather-on-metal sound as she watered our flower boxes. Even in civilian clothes, she maintained that cop posture, scanning, assessing, ready for trouble. That's when the white Escalade with Real TR1 vanity plates invaded our driveway like a suburban tank. Karen Whitfield stepped out wearing enough jewelry to fund a small country's defense budget. Real estate agent, 8-year HOA president, married to city councilman Brad Whitfield, and absolutely convinced that God created the universe specifically to validate her opinions. This woman could find building code violations in the Sistine Chapel. Mr. Morrison. Not a greeting, a royal proclamation. She clutched a manila envelope like it contained evidence of war crimes. Formal violation notice regarding your unauthorized exterior modifications. I felt the weathered deck boards rough under my bare feet as I approached. What modifications, Karen? That door. She pointed accusingly at our beautiful new oak door with custom stained glass panels. Completely violates architectural harmony standards. $500 fine plus immediate restoration to community compliance. The sweet scent of pine needles should have been calming. Instead, I tasted that familiar metallic surge of controlled rage. We have grandfathered rights, Karen. This property predates your HOA by 4 decades. Her laugh could have stripped paint. Grandfathered rights don't override community standards, sweetie. This monstrosity affects everyone's property values. She gestured at our home like it was a sewage treatment plant. Sarah stepped forward, still maintaining her civilian cover. We've thoroughly reviewed the HOA governing documents. There's no door restriction in the original county filing. Karen's smile turned venomous. I don't care what you think you know about law, honey. I've been protecting this community's standards since before you people moved to our mountain paradise. The way she said you people carried enough poison to kill small mammals. Here's a legal nugget most folks don't know. HOA architectural standards must be properly recorded with county officials to be enforceable. Otherwise, they're just expensive toilet paper. 30 days compliance, Karen continued, or we file a lien and pursue forced sale for community protection. The threat hung in the crisp mountain air like smoke from a house fire. Sarah's wedding ring began that unconscious tap-tap-tap against her coffee mug, the only tell that her professional instincts were engaging. "We'll explore our options," I replied carefully. Karen's predatory smile widened. "You do that, Jake. Some residents need to learn that community harmony requires financial commitment." Something about how she emphasized financial sent ice water through my veins. As her Escalade crunched down our gravel driveway trailing diesel exhaust, I turned to Sarah. "Can she legally do this?" Sarah was already reaching for her phone, and I caught a glimpse of something dangerous flickering behind her eyes. Let's find out exactly what kind of authority Karen Whitfield really thinks she has. Little did I know, my wife was about to turn those investigative skills on our neighborhood's biggest predator. 3 days after Karen's door ultimatum, she escalated faster than a wildfire in August. I was in my workshop, converted from the cabin's old storage shed, when the unmistakable rumble of multiple vehicles cut through the peaceful mountain morning. "Jake! We've got an invasion force!" Sarah called from the kitchen window. Through the sawdust-covered glass, I watched Karen's white Escalade pull up like the lead vehicle in a small-town parade, followed by a beat-up contractor's pickup that had seen better decades. Out stepped Karen in full real estate agent armor, blazer, clipboard, and enough confidence to sell ice to Eskimos. Behind her came 2 nervous-looking board members I'd seen at exactly one community meeting, plus a stocky guy in work boots who screamed, "I overcharge for everything." I killed my table saw and headed outside, wood shavings still decorating my flannel shirt like the world's least impressive confetti. "Mr. Morrison," Karen announced with the authority of someone who'd watched too many courtroom dramas, "we're conducting an emergency property inspection under Section 4.7 of our community safety protocols." The crisp mountain air suddenly felt charged with that pre-storm electricity you get before all hell breaks loose. "What emergency?" Sarah appeared beside me, coffee mug in hand, looking about as concerned as someone checking the mailbox. "Anonymous neighbor reported structural concerns," Karen replied, consulting her clipboard like it contained state secrets. "Potential safety hazards affecting community welfare require immediate professional assessment." The contractor, built like a fire hydrant with commitment issues, was already circling our foundation with predatory interest. "Yeah, these old cabins are disasters waiting to happen. Foundation problems, electrical nightmares, hidden water damage that'll cost you $20,000 minimum." Sarah stepped forward with that deceptively casual movement cops perfect after years of de-escalating situations. "Do you have proper state licensing for property inspections in Colorado?" The contractor's swagger deflated faster than a punctured tire. "Well, I'm a general contractor." "That wasn't my question." Sarah's voice remained conversational, but I caught the steel underneath. After 20 years of marriage, you learn to recognize when your wife shifts from civilian mode to whatever the hell her real job actually involves. Karen jumped into the breach like a politician at a photo opportunity. "Rick's been our trusted community contractor for years. He knows exactly what standards we maintain here." She gestured toward our beautiful front door with obvious disgust. "Speaking of standards, those unauthorized lock changes constitute another serious violation." The metallic taste of controlled anger flooded my mouth. "Excuse me?" "New security installations require HOA approval per our emergency safety bylaws," Karen declared with the smugness of someone dropping a royal flush. "Passed during COVID for community protection, when only responsible board members could attend." Here's where things got interesting. Back in my Air Force days, I'd learned that when someone starts making up rules on the spot, they're usually hiding something bigger. Karen was improvising faster than a jazz musician on espresso. Sarah's wedding ring began that unconscious tapping against her coffee mug, the only sign her professional instincts were fully engaged. "Which specific meeting addressed security protocols, Karen?" "Emergency session March 2021. Limited attendance due to health guidelines." Fascinating. Sarah's tone could have been discussing grocery lists. "Because I actually researched Colorado HOA law pretty thoroughly when we moved here. Emergency meetings require 72-hour written notice to all members, regardless of who shows up." I remembered Sarah spending hours at her laptop those first few weeks claiming she was just being thorough about community rules. Turns out my wife doesn't do anything halfway. Karen's confidence flickered like a candle in wind. Emergency situations obviously override normal bureaucratic procedures. "Do they?" Sarah pulled out her phone with practiced ease. "Because state statutes are surprisingly specific about emergency powers. They exist to prevent exactly this kind of creative interpretation. Rick shifted his weight like a man realizing he'd wandered into someone else's fight. Look, we just need to verify safety compliance. Based on whose authority? I stepped closer, letting my military bearings show through civilian clothes. You're on private property without permission, claiming emergency powers that apparently don't exist, demanding access to inspect work that was properly permitted through county officials. The mountain silence stretched between us, broken only by wind through pine needles and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Furthermore, Sarah continued with devastating casualness, demanding master keys to private residences violates multiple Colorado privacy statutes. HOA authority has very specific limitations regarding residential security. Karen's face was approaching that dangerous shade of red that usually preceded her most memorable public meltdowns. Community safety supersedes individual privacy concerns. Actually, it doesn't. Sarah's smile could have powered a small city. But I'm genuinely curious about these emergency bylaws. Could you provide the official vote tallies and recorded minutes? That's administrative details. Karen's authority was crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. Because legitimate bylaw changes require majority approval of all HOA members, not just whoever attends secret meetings. Sarah had clearly done her homework better than Karen expected. Rick cleared his throat like a man desperate to escape. Maybe we should reschedule this whole thing. Outstanding idea, I agreed cheerfully. Next time, bring proper credentials, legal authority, and advance written notice as required by actual law. Karen gathered her remaining dignity like scattered papers in wind. This isn't finished. Some residents need to learn that community harmony requires respect for established authority. As they retreated to their vehicles in obvious disarray, Karen's parting shot carried across our driveway with all the subtlety of a train wreck. Legal technicalities won't protect you from community standards forever. The diesel exhaust from Karen's Escalade hung in the pristine mountain air like a toxic promise of future battles. Sarah watched them disappear around the bend, still maintaining that rhythmic wedding ring percussion against her mug. Well, she said quietly, that was educational. Was it? I studied her face, recognizing something dangerous flickering behind those calm eyes. Because Karen looked like someone who just realized she picked a fight with the wrong person. Sarah's smile was small, controlled, and absolutely terrifying. She has absolutely no idea. Karen's retreat lasted exactly 48 hours before she launched what I can only describe as psychological warfare disguised as neighborly concern. If I thought her first assault was aggressive, I had seriously underestimated the creative vindictiveness of a HOA president with wounded pride and unlimited free time. The wellness check parade started Monday morning. Picture this, 7:30 a.m. sharp, right when Sarah's trying to enjoy her coffee and the peaceful mountain silence. A different board member materializes at our door with transparently fabricated emergencies. Monday brought Margaret Riley, treasurer, wringing her hands about unusual vehicle activity. Tuesday featured Tom Bradley, vice president, deeply concerned about our excessive electricity usage patterns. Wednesday delivered Carol Martinez, secretary, practically hyperventilating over our potential wildlife attraction issues. The diesel exhaust from their various SUVs became as predictable as sunrise and about half as welcome. But Karen's real masterstroke targeted my workshop. See, I'd been running a small custom furniture business from my converted shed. Deck repairs, built-ins, the kind of skilled work that keeps a retired military guy busy and profitable. Everything perfectly legal, properly zoned, all permits filed correctly with Douglas County. But apparently, the gentle hum of my table saw at 10 a.m. constituted industrial noise disrupting community tranquility. You're kidding me, I told Carol during her Wednesday performance, the sweet scent of pine shavings still clinging to my clothes from morning work. A table saw during normal business hours is somehow disruptive? Carol shifted like someone forced to deliver bad news she didn't believe. Well, several neighbors have expressed concerns about the mechanical sounds. Sarah materialized behind me, coffee mug in hand, radiating that particular energy cops develop after years of listening to creative interpretations of truth. Which specific neighbors filed these complaints, Carol? They requested anonymity. How remarkably convenient. Sarah's voice carried enough frost to preserve meat. Anonymous complaints are so much easier to manufacture than legitimate grievances backed by actual people. Thursday morning brought the real escalation. Joe Martinez, city electrical inspector, appearing unannounced with clipboard, attitude, and obvious preconceptions about what he'd find. "Got reports you're running unauthorized commercial operations," Joe announced, skipping basic courtesy entirely. "Need to verify electrical compliance for business use." I led him through my workshop, confident in every wire and outlet. The previous owner had been an electrician. Everything properly grounded, circuits correctly rated, electrical panel installed by licensed professionals who actually knew what they were doing. Joe prowled around for 20 minutes, clearly hoping to discover violations that would justify Karen's harassment campaign. "Everything appears adequate," he admitted with obvious reluctance, "though I'd recommend voluntary compliance review." Compliance with what exactly? Sarah had followed us, observing Joe's inspection with the laser focus of someone trained to spot inconsistencies and motivations. Just being thorough, these older structures sometimes hide problems. Sarah's wedding ring began that telltale percussion against her ceramic mug, tap, tap, tap. Early in our marriage, I'd mistaken it for nervous energy. 20 years later, I recognized it as her brain processing information, connecting dots invisible to normal people. "Joe, you wouldn't happen to play golf with anyone from our HOA leadership, would you?" Joe's professionally neutral mask slipped slightly. "Don't see how that's relevant to electrical safety. Just curious." Sarah's smile belonged in a poker game. "Because this inspection feels less about code compliance and more about official harassment disguised as municipal concern." After Joe departed with his lack of violations and bruised expectations, Sarah opened her laptop and dove into what looked like serious digital archaeology. I'd watched her work late nights before, claimed she was reviewing federal case law or staying current with financial regulations. But this felt different, focused, predatory. "Finding anything interesting in there?" I asked, refilling her coffee. Karen's been remarkably creative. Sarah scrolled through dense financial documents. Past 3 years, our HOA collected $340,000 in special assessments for emergency repairs and critical community improvements. That sounds excessive. Extremely excessive, especially since I can't locate evidence that any improvements actually occurred. Sarah's fingers moved across keys with practiced efficiency. "Remember last year's emergency roof replacement on the community center? Cost everyone an extra $800 assessment?" I remembered Sarah's irritation at the unexpected expense, but we'd paid like responsible community members. "Drove past yesterday. That roof looks identical to when we moved here 2 years ago." Sarah angled the screen toward me. "And every invoice for this phantom work? Paid to Pine Ridge Construction Services? Never heard of them. Neither has Colorado's licensing board, but their business registration lists a fascinating address." Sarah opened another browser window. "Belongs to Rick Whitfield, our friend Karen's brother-in-law. The pattern crystallized like frost on morning windows. Fake inspections, manufactured violations, anonymous harassment. This wasn't simple neighborhood politics. This was organized fraud, masquerading as community governance." "How much money total?" I asked. "Based on 3 years of questionable expenditures?" "Approximately $425,000 funneled through shell companies owned by Karen's family." Sarah's expression was pure professional assessment. "Anyone who might notice irregularities or ask uncomfortable questions gets the full harassment treatment until they sell and disappear." The morning mountain air suddenly carried a chill that had nothing to do with altitude. "She's systematically stealing from every family in this neighborhood. Appears that way. And I've prosecuted federal white-collar cases involving smaller amounts." Sarah closed the laptop with decisive finality. That's when I realized my wife hadn't been researching HOA regulations as a concerned homeowner. She'd been building a criminal case against a sophisticated embezzlement ring, and Karen Whitfield had just made it deeply personal. Karen's next escalation arrived via certified mail on a Tuesday morning that started with birdsong and ended with the distinct aroma of legal desperation. Sarah was preparing for another one of her mysterious work trips, the kind where she packed tactical gear, checked weather reports for 3 different states, and got that 1,000-yard stare that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. The envelope bore the pretentious letterhead of Whitfield, Patterson and Associates, her city councilman husband's law firm. Nothing screams ethical conflict of interest quite like weaponizing your spouse's legal practice against neighbors who dare to question your authority. Cease and desist, I read aloud, the expensive paper crackling like kindling. Immediate removal of all surveillance equipment. Violation of neighbors' reasonable expectation of privacy. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Sarah paused mid-pack, that wedding ring beginning its telltale percussion against her travel mug. The sound reminded me of raindrops before a storm, innocent individually, ominous collectively. Let me see that masterpiece. She scanned the document with the efficiency of someone who'd read thousands of legal threats. Fascinating legal theory. Shame Colorado explicitly allows recording on your own property, and our cameras don't capture anything beyond our fence line. Her smile could have flashed frozen lava. Apparently, Brad Whitfield's correspondence course law degree didn't cover basic property rights. The real surprise came Thursday evening while Sarah was off doing whatever federal marshals do when they vanish for 72 hours with minimal luggage and maximum ammunition. Tom Bradley called with the enthusiasm of someone announcing terminal illness. Jake, emergency HOA meeting tomorrow night. Karen's demanding a vote on disciplinary measures. What kind of disciplinary measures? Legal action. Against both of you, for disrupting community standards and creating hostile environment. Tom's voice carried the defeated tone of someone watching democracy die in a subdivision conference room. Friday night, the community center felt like a kangaroo court designed by someone whose only legal education came from daytime television. Karen had orchestrated her audience carefully. Newer residents who hadn't yet realized their dues were funding her extended family's construction business, plus her usual collection of enablers and social climbers. The air hung thick with stale coffee, nervous perspiration, and the particular tension that precedes public character assassination. Sarah slipped in just as Karen called the meeting to order, choosing a back row seat like someone accustomed to observing situations before engaging. Even in civilian clothes, jeans, flannel shirt, hiking boots, she radiated that unmistakable law enforcement energy that made smart criminals nervous and stupid ones overconfident. Primary agenda item, Karen announced with the solemnity of someone declaring holy war, addressing ongoing disruption by certain residents who refuse to acknowledge basic community standards. She'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation. Actual slides with clip art and everything. 20 minutes of bullet points detailing our alleged sins, unauthorized architectural modifications, aggressive surveillance systems, failure to comply with emergency protocols, and my personal favorite, pattern of challenging legitimate board authority. Therefore, Karen concluded with theatrical flourish, I motion for immediate legal action against Jake and Sarah Morrison for willful violation of community harmony and creation of hostile residential environment. The room buzzed with uncomfortable energy. This felt less like democratic process and more like public execution with Robert's rules of order. That's when Karen overplayed her hand spectacularly. These people, she declared, gesturing towards Sarah like she was indicating a toxic waste spill, clearly don't understand that property ownership in quality communities comes with social responsibilities. Some residents need to learn their place. The phrase, these people, hung in the mountain air like smoke from a house fire. Several neighbors visibly flinched, finally recognizing the ugly undertones in Karen's campaign. Sarah stood with the fluid grace of someone trained in tactical movement. Before proceeding with votes, shouldn't we review procedural requirements for disciplinary actions? Residents don't question board authority, Karen snapped, her mask slipping faster than ice on hot asphalt. Actually, Colorado revised statutes require specific procedures for HOA disciplinary measures. Sarah's tone carried the patient authority of someone explaining reality to willfully ignorant people, including proper notification timelines, evidence presentation standards, and defendant rights to response. She consulted her phone with practiced efficiency. Additionally, legal action authorization requires majority approval of all association members, not just whoever attends Karen's strategically scheduled meetings. We have proxy votes, Karen protested, shuffling papers like someone looking for homework they forgot to do. Do you? Sarah's question carried surgical precision. Because valid proxies require written authorization with witnessed signatures, filed with the association secretary per state law. The silence stretched like taffy in summer heat. Karen fumbled through her carefully prepared documents, clearly unable to produce the legal foundation for her coup attempt. "Carol," Sarah addressed the secretary directly, "do you have proxy documentation on file for tonight's vote?" Carol Martinez studied her hands like they contained classified information. No written proxies were submitted. Tom Bradley looked like someone watching his pension fund evaporate in real time. "Karen, without proper documentation, we can't proceed with this motion." Karen's face cycled through colors that violated several laws of physics. "This is administrative harassment. Residents can't dictate board procedures using legal technicalities." "Actually," Sarah replied with devastating calm, "residents can absolutely insist boards follow actual law instead of inventing authority as they go." As the meeting dissolved into confused murmuring and strategic exits, Karen intercepted Sarah near the door, her voice carrying enough poison to contaminate groundwater. "You think your legal research makes you untouchable," she hissed, loud enough for lingering neighbors to appreciate the full performance. "But communities have standards for good reasons. Some people simply don't belong in places like Pine Ridge." Sarah's response was quiet, controlled, and absolutely terrifying. "You're completely right, Karen. Some people definitely don't belong here." The drive home was silent except for gravel crunching under tires and my growing certainty that Karen had just declared war on someone who fought battles she couldn't even imagine. Saturday morning delivered the kind of pristine mountain silence that makes you believe in world peace, right up until Sarah opened her laptop and detonated a financial bomb that shattered every assumption I'd held about suburban tranquility. "Jake, you really need to see this." Her voice carried that particular edge I'd learned to associate with very bad news for very bad people, usually delivered with the clinical precision of someone who'd made a career out of exposing lies. I brought fresh coffee, the rich aroma mixing with pine scent drifting through our open windows, and peered over her shoulder at spreadsheets that looked like they'd been designed by someone with a personal vendetta against human comprehension. "Remember all those special assessments Karen's been hammering residents with?" Sarah scrolled through 3 years of HOA financial records with the practiced efficiency of someone who hunted white-collar criminals for a living. Emergency roof repairs, community infrastructure upgrades, security enhancements, $340,000 in additional fees beyond regular dues. That's an impressive number of emergencies for a neighborhood where the biggest crisis is usually someone's garbage can blowing over, especially considering none of those emergencies actually required repairs. Sarah opened a county building permits database, the screen practically glowing with bureaucratic emptiness. 0 permits filed, 0 inspections completed, 0 evidence that any work was ever performed. The morning coffee suddenly tasted like betrayal and stupidity. So where did all that money disappear to? That's where it gets deliciously criminal. Sarah's smile belonged in a documentary about apex predators. Every single payment went to Pine Ridge Construction Services, a shell company owned by Rick Whitfield, Karen's intellectually challenged brother-in-law, the same Rick who couldn't produce basic licensing when he tried to intimidate us. She clicked through bank records with surgical precision, each transaction telling a story uglier than the last. But the real masterpiece is the insurance fraud. Karen filed claims for storm damage that never existed, hail damage to our community center roof worth $85,000 from Mountain States Insurance. For damage that's purely imaginary. Gets exponentially better. Insurance check deposited into HOA accounts, then immediately transferred to Pine Ridge Construction for emergency repairs that existed only in Karen's creative imagination. Sarah's wedding ring maintained its rhythmic percussion against ceramic, the sound oddly comforting despite the circumstances. Classic insurance fraud layered over systematic embezzlement, wrapped in community authority. I studied the damning evidence, patterns emerging like storm clouds gathering over peaceful valleys. This isn't just stealing HOA dues. This is a sophisticated criminal enterprise disguised as suburban governance. Sarah's professional assessment carried the weight of 15 years prosecuting financial crimes. Karen's been operating a protection racket, manufacture violations, impose excessive fees, harass residents until they sell below market value. Her real estate company represents the buyers, she collects commissions, and the predatory cycle continues. The implications crashed over me like avalanche snow, sudden, overwhelming, and absolutely devastating. Every family that's moved away recently, systematically driven out through manufactured crises and financial pressure. Sarah displayed neighborhood sales data that painted a picture darker than mountain shadows at sunset. 14 forced sales in 3 years, all below market value, all handled by Karen's agency, all followed by immediate move-in assessments for replacement residents. How much total theft are we discussing? Conservative estimate? $425,000 in direct embezzlement, plus real estate commissions on manipulated sales totaling approximately $2.8 million. Sarah's calculations were precise as surgical instruments. Karen's been systematically looting this entire community while positioning herself as its benevolent protector. That familiar recognition feeling hit, the same instinct that had served me well in military maintenance when small problems revealed catastrophic system failures. She targeted us specifically because we own outright, no mortgage leverage, and we actually read legal documents. Exactly. Most residents either lack time for financial scrutiny or assume board members operate in good faith. Sarah closed the laptop with finality suggesting major tactical decisions had crystallized. Karen's been counting on apathy, intimidation, and basic human conflict avoidance. What happens now? Though Sarah's expression already suggested I knew the answer. Now we let Karen continue her escalation while I build a federal case that will survive any defense attorney she can afford. Sarah's tone was pure prosecutorial confidence. Desperation makes criminals sloppy, and sloppy criminals provide excellent evidence. The peaceful mountain morning suddenly crackled with electricity, having nothing to do with atmospheric conditions. My wife wasn't just irritated about neighborhood harassment anymore. She was actively hunting a criminal enterprise, and Karen Whitfield had just provided all the personal motivation necessary. How long before you have prosecutable evidence? Sarah's smile was controlled, patient, and absolutely terrifying. Karen's going to hand me everything I need. She just doesn't realize it yet. Sunday morning brought revelations that hit harder than mountain lightning. Sarah emerged from her home office carrying a federal badge case I'd never seen before, along with credentials that explained 15 years of mysterious work trips and vague job descriptions. Deputy U.S. Marshal Sarah Morrison, Financial Crimes Division. She set the badge on our kitchen table like she was laying down a royal flush. Specializing in asset forfeiture, white-collar prosecution, and taking down criminal enterprises that think badges are just shiny toys. I stared at the federal eagle emblem, my coffee growing cold as the implications sank in. 15 years I've been married to a federal marshal. Operational security. The kind of people I prosecute have long memories and longer reach. Sarah's explanation came with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing grocery lists. But Karen Whitfield just made this personal, and personal means I stopped playing defense. The scent of fresh pine needles drifted through our open windows as Sarah transformed our dining room into what looked like a federal task force command center. Laptop computers, legal documents, financial records, and enough coffee to fuel a small army's worth of late-night investigation. First step, Sarah announced, pulling up what appeared to be federal databases I definitely wasn't supposed to see, is understanding exactly how deep this criminal enterprise reaches. Her fingers flew across keyboards with practiced efficiency, accessing resources that made Google look like a child's toy. Wire fraud, mail fraud, insurance fraud, racketeering. Karen's checked every box for federal prosecution. When criminals use banks, postal service, or electronic communications for fraud schemes, they've just invited federal jurisdiction to the party. The legal takeaway hit like ice water. Federal crimes carry serious prison time because they cross state lines and involve federally regulated institutions, banks, insurance companies, and communications networks. By Tuesday, Sarah had recruited what she called ground assets, neighbors who'd been systematically victimized by Karen's operation. Tom Buckley, the retired accountant, had been quietly documenting financial discrepancies for months without realizing their criminal scope. Margaret Riley, widowed and living on fixed income, had nearly lost her home to excessive special assessments that funded Karen's family business. 3 residents with legitimate grievances, solid documentation, and federal law enforcement backing, Sarah explained, spreading evidence across our table like she was planning a military operation. Karen's facing a coordinated response instead of isolated targets. Tom arrived Wednesday evening carrying manila folders thick enough to stop bullets, his accountant's attention to detail proving invaluable for building prosecutable cases. I've been tracking these expenditures for 2 years, Tom explained, his spreadsheets making Sarah's financial analysis look simple. Construction invoices inflated 300 to 400% above market rates, work orders for projects that never happened, insurance claims for damage that mysteriously appeared and disappeared without actual repairs. The workshop became our evidence processing center, the familiar smell of sawdust mixing with printer ink and determination. My construction expertise proved crucial for analyzing Karen's fraudulent invoices, prices so inflated they bordered on comedy, work descriptions that violated basic physics, and completion timelines that defied reality. This invoice claims Rick installed $47,000 worth of roofing materials in a single afternoon, I pointed out, reviewing documentation that read like fiction written by someone who'd never seen actual construction. For reference, that's enough materials to roof 3 houses, requiring a crew of 12 working 2 full days. Sarah documented every inconsistency with federal-grade precision. Fraudulent invoicing becomes wire fraud when payments are processed electronically. Wire fraud carries 20-year maximum sentences under federal guidelines. Margaret's contribution proved equally devastating. As someone facing financial hardship from Karen's manufactured assessments, she'd kept meticulous records of every interaction, every threat, every manipulative tactic used to force compliance. Karen told me directly that non-payment would result in forced sale. Margaret's voice carried the steel of someone who'd survived worse than suburban bullies. She said the community had standards, and people who couldn't maintain them should find more appropriate housing. Sarah's smile was pure prosecutorial satisfaction. Extortion charges just wrote themselves. The strategic approach Sarah outlined felt like military planning conducted by someone who understood both legal warfare and actual warfare. We let Karen continue escalating while documenting every illegal action. Desperate criminals make bigger mistakes, and bigger mistakes provide better evidence for federal prosecutors. Thursday night, Sarah explained the federal asset forfeiture process with the enthusiasm of someone describing Christmas morning. When we prove Karen's been using criminal proceeds to purchase real estate, vehicles, and luxury items, federal law allows seizure of those assets. Recovery goes directly to victims, in this case, every resident who paid fraudulent assessments. How much recovery are we discussing? Tom asked. Conservative estimate based on 3 years of documented fraud, $380,000 in direct restitution, plus penalties that could triple damages. Sarah's calculations carried the precision of someone who'd done this mathematics many times before. The evening mountain air felt charged with possibility as our small group finalized plans that would transform neighborhood harassment into federal prosecution. Karen Whitfield had declared war on the wrong neighbors, and she was about to discover that some battles are fought with badges, subpoenas, and the full weight of federal law enforcement. Timeline? I asked. Sarah's confidence was absolute. Karen's desperation will provide everything we need within 2 weeks. Then we watch her criminal empire collapse in real time. Karen's desperation hit Tuesday morning like a toddler's tantrum scaled up to criminal proportions. I woke to find our meticulously maintained flower beds looking like they'd been attacked by a rabid weed whacker, irrigation lines severed with surgical precision, and $200 worth of landscaping transformed into what could charitably be called abstract art. The morning mountain air carried the acrid bite of fresh spray paint where someone had decorated our security cameras with neon orange graffiti screaming, "Mind your business," in letters that suggested midnight courage and daylight cowardice. Subtle as a freight train through a library, Sarah observed, photographing the vandalism with federal-grade documentation precision. Even wearing my old Air Force t-shirt and jeans that had seen better decades, she moved with that unmistakable cop efficiency that turned crime scenes into courtroom evidence. Should we call the sheriff? I asked, though Sarah's expression suggested she had different plans brewing. Not yet. Let's see how far our HOA president is willing to escalate before introducing her to federal consequences. Sarah's smile carried the patient satisfaction of someone watching mice navigate toward cheese-baited traps. Karen's psychological warfare campaign intensified by Thursday with all the sophistication of someone whose criminal education came from binge-watching crime dramas during wine-fueled evenings. Strange vehicles began parking outside our property at strategic hours, Different cars, rotating drivers, but always positioned for maximum intimidation while maintaining that thin veneer of plausible deniability that Karen apparently mistook for cleverness. The real escalation arrived Friday morning via Margaret Riley's trembling phone call. "Someone tried breaking into my house last night," she whispered, with the terror of someone discovering that suburban safety was purely theoretical. "Around 2 a.m., someone tested my back door handle, then circled the foundation like they were casing the place. When I hit the porch lights, they bolted faster than teenagers caught drinking." "Did you contact police?" Sarah's tone shifted seamlessly from neighborly concern to federal martial assessment mode. "And tell them what? Someone took a midnight stroll around my house?" Margaret's bitter laugh carried decades of being dismissed as hysterical or senile. "Karen would claim I'm suffering age-related paranoia and stress-induced hallucinations." But Margaret wasn't finished. "However, I found boot prints in my flower bed. Work boots with very distinctive tread patterns that I photographed, measured, and documented with ruler comparisons for scale." Sarah's wedding ring launched into its familiar percussion solo against ceramic tap, 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 signaling that her professional hunting instincts were fully activated. 40 years as a paralegal clearly taught you proper evidence collection. Friday afternoon delivered Karen's most spectacularly brazen escalation. While Sarah was mysteriously absent conducting what she vaguely described as federal consultation meetings in Denver, Rick Whitfield materialized at our property with a crew that looked like they'd graduated summa cum laude from Intimidation University. "Routine tree maintenance," Rick announced with theatrical authority, gesturing toward a magnificent pine tree that had been peacefully minding its own business near our property line for approximately half a century. "Anonymous neighbor safety complaints require immediate hazard mitigation." The chainsaw roared to life before coherent objections could form, its mechanical violence echoing off mountain slopes like industrial warfare. 20 minutes later, a massive pine branch had accidentally fallen across our fence with the precision of controlled demolition, crushing 30 feet of cedar planking and creating instant property damage that would make insurance adjusters weep. "Whoops," Rick declared with all the sincerity of a politician apologizing for campaign finance violations. "These old trees can be real unpredictable. Better get that fence repaired immediately. Community standards mandate proper boundary maintenance." His repair estimate read like extortion dressed in contractor clothing. $3,200 for materials and labor that any legitimate business would charge $800 to complete. The invoice bore Rick's signature with flourishes suggesting someone who believed his own authority was legally meaningful. The crisp mountain afternoon should have inspired peace and tranquility, but instead crackled with the tension preceding either complete surrender or total warfare. I documented the accidental damage from multiple angles, noting how chainsaw cuts revealed deliberate directional felling that could only result from intentional sabotage. "Payment due within 15 days, Rick continued, "or we pursue legal remedies for property damage and community standards violations." That evening, Sarah returned from Denver carrying manila folders thick enough to stop small arms fire and wearing the expression of someone who'd just acquired significant tactical advantages in an ongoing war. "How was your day, honey?" she asked with the casual tone of someone discussing weather patterns while tactical nuclear weapons were being positioned in the background. "Karen's intellectually challenged brother-in-law destroyed our fence and wants $3,200 to repair his own vandalism," I reported, showing evidence of Rick's handiwork. "Plus, someone's been conducting late-night intimidation tours around Margaret's house." Sarah examined the destruction with professional thoroughness, paying particular attention to chainsaw cut angles and Rick's laughably inflated repair estimate. "Absolutely perfect. Karen's escalating from financial fraud to property destruction and witness intimidation." "Perfect how exactly?" "Because property crimes provide clearer evidence than financial schemes, and intimidating witnesses adds federal racketeering charges to our growing collection." Sarah's smile belonged in nature documentaries about apex predators stalking prey. Karen's desperation is hand-delivering exactly the evidence federal prosecutors love most. The evening mountain air carried electricity that had nothing to do with atmospheric conditions. Karen Whitfield had just crossed legal boundaries that transformed suburban harassment into federal felonies, and she was about to discover that some neighbors possess badges, subpoenas, and unlimited federal resources. "What's our next move?" I asked. Sarah's confidence was absolute and genuinely terrifying. We let Karen continue providing rope until she's thoroughly hanged herself. Karen's final desperate gambit arrived Monday morning with all the subtlety of a train wreck orchestrated by someone who'd confused federal crimes with neighborhood pranks. I was in my workshop, the familiar scent of pine shavings and machine oil providing false comfort, when the unmistakable wail of police sirens cut through the mountain silence like a chainsaw through meditation. Through the window, I watched two Douglas County Sheriff's cruisers pull into our driveway, their emergency lights painting our peaceful property in alternating red and blue that screamed serious criminal situation to anyone within visual range. Sarah emerged from the house in civilian clothes, jeans, hiking boots, and a flannel shirt that made her look like any other mountain resident, except for that unmistakable cop posture that suggested tactical readiness disguised as casual morning routine. Behind the deputies' vehicles, Karen's white Escalade lurked like a vulture at a roadside accident, positioned for optimal viewing of what she clearly expected to be our public humiliation and arrest. Deputy Martinez stepped out first, a young officer whose serious expression suggested he'd been briefed on a dangerous domestic situation requiring immediate intervention. His partner, Deputy Johnson, positioned himself strategically while maintaining the professional alertness of someone expecting potential violence. "Ma'am, we need to speak with both residents regarding reports of threats and aggressive behavior," Martinez announced, consulting notes that had obviously been provided by someone with creative interpretation skills. Karen emerged from her Escalade wearing her most theatrical victim costume, designer sunglasses despite overcast skies, and body language that screamed traumatized community leaders seeking justice. "Officers, thank you for responding so quickly," Karen declared with the dramatic flair of someone auditioning for daytime television. "These people have been terrorizing our peaceful community with threats, intimidation, and aggressive surveillance of law-abiding neighbors." The morning air suddenly felt charged with the particular tension that precedes either spectacular justice or spectacular injustice, depending on which side of the badge you occupy. Specifically, Karen continued, consulting her own notes like a prosecutor presenting closing arguments, "Mr. Morrison threatened me physically during our last interaction, and his wife has been conducting illegal investigations and harassment of community volunteers." Deputy Martinez turned toward me with professional neutrality. "Sir, we need to hear your version of these allegations." "Happy to clarify," I replied, maintaining the calm demeanor that military service teaches you during false accusations. "But perhaps we should discuss this with all parties present for complete transparency." That's when Karen made her fatal miscalculation. "Furthermore," she announced with the triumph of someone playing what she believed was a winning card, "they've changed locks specifically to hide evidence of illegal activities. I demand immediate police investigation of what they're concealing behind those unauthorized security measures." The deputies exchanged glances that suggested Karen's demands were exceeding reasonable boundaries, but she was nowhere near finished with her performance. "As HOA president, I have legitimate authority to ensure community safety," Karen declared, her voice rising with evangelical fervor. "These people refuse to cooperate with proper governance and represent a clear threat to neighborhood security." Deputy Johnson stepped forward. "Ma'am, we'll need to speak with both residents separately to understand the full situation." Sarah had been quietly observing the entire exchange with the patience of someone watching amateur theater performed by actors who didn't understand they were auditioning for federal prison. Now she stepped forward with fluid grace that suggested extensive tactical training. "Officers, before we proceed, I should probably clarify something about jurisdiction and proper authority." Sarah's tone carried the conversational calm of someone discussing weather forecasts while tactical nuclear weapons were being armed in the background. She reached into her back pocket and produced a leather credential case that caught morning sunlight like polished steel. The federal badge and ID card seemed to materialize in slow motion, transforming the entire dynamic faster than lightning strikes. Deputy U.S. Marshal Sarah Morrison, Financial Crimes Division. Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to introducing herself to people who were about to have very bad days. "Currently conducting a federal investigation into systematic embezzlement, insurance fraud, and criminal racketeering within this HOA." The silence that followed could have been measured in geological time. Deputy Martinez stared at Sarah's credentials like they contained instructions for disarming nuclear weapons. Deputy Johnson's expression shifted from routine domestic call to "holy shit," We just walked into a federal case. Karen's face underwent color changes that violated several laws of physics, cycling from confident pink to confused pale to absolutely terrified white in approximately 3 seconds. What? This is ridiculous. Karen's voice cracked like ice under pressure. She's abusing federal authority for personal vendettas. This is government overreach targeting innocent community volunteers. Sarah's smile was surgical precision wrapped in professional courtesy. Actually, Mrs. Whitfield, filing false police reports constitutes a felony under Colorado state law. And when those reports are designed to obstruct federal investigations, they become federal crimes carrying substantially longer prison sentences. Deputy Martinez found his voice first. Marshal Morrison, we had no knowledge of ongoing federal investigation. No reason you should have, Sarah replied with the calm efficiency of someone who'd navigated similar situations countless times. But now that you're here, perhaps Mrs. Whitfield would like to explain why she's been systematically filing false complaints against federal law enforcement officers. Karen's desperation reached peak visibility as she realized her master plan had just transformed her from predator to prey. This is all a misunderstanding. Community standards require appropriate oversight. Sarah's response was quietly devastating. You're absolutely right, Karen. Community standards definitely require appropriate oversight, federal oversight. The mountain morning suddenly felt like the calm before hurricanes, and Karen Whitfield was about to discover that some storms carry badges, handcuffs, and the unlimited resources of federal prosecution. The emergency HOA meeting that would destroy Karen's criminal empire arrived Thursday evening like a perfectly orchestrated storm. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as residents filed in, drawn by Karen's desperate email claiming federal harassment and government overreach targeting innocent volunteers. The air hung thick with anticipation, stale coffee, and the particular tension that precedes either spectacular vindication or total annihilation. Karen had packed the room with her remaining supporters, mostly newer residents who hadn't yet connected the dots between their excessive fees and her family's construction business. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen began with the theatrical authority of someone making a final stand, we're facing an unprecedented attack on our community values by residents who've weaponized federal resources for personal vendettas. She gestured towards Sarah and me like we were exhibits in a criminal trial. These people have brought government intimidation into our peaceful neighborhood, using badges and federal authority to terrorize volunteer board members who've dedicated years to protecting property values. The crowd murmured with the uncertain energy of people trying to process information that didn't align with observable reality. Tom Buckley sat in the front row, manila folders thick with financial evidence positioned like ammunition for the coming battle. Furthermore, Karen continued, her voice rising with evangelical fervor, I have documentation proving systematic violations of community standards, aggressive surveillance of law-abiding neighbors, and deliberate attempts to undermine legitimate HOA authority. That's when she made her final, fatal mistake. The federal marshal sitting among us tonight, Karen declared with the triumph of someone revealing the villain's secret identity, has been conducting illegal investigations using government resources for personal benefit. This represents corruption at the highest levels. The silence that followed felt like the moment before avalanches. Every eye in the room turned towards Sarah, who sat calmly in civilian clothes, jeans, flannel shirt, hiking boots, looking like any other mountain resident except for that unmistakable law enforcement energy radiating from her like heat. Sarah stood with the fluid grace of someone trained in tactical movement, producing her federal credentials with practiced efficiency. The badge caught overhead fluorescent lighting like polished steel, transforming the entire atmosphere faster than mountain weather changes. Since Mrs. Whitfield has made my professional identity public, Sarah announced with the calm authority of someone accustomed to addressing hostile audiences, let me clarify the actual situation for everyone. She moved to the front of the room with confident strides that suggested courtroom experience and zero tolerance for theatrical nonsense. I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal Sarah Morrison, Financial Crimes Division, and I've been conducting a federal investigation into systematic embezzlement, insurance fraud, and criminal racketeering within this HOA. The community center erupted in confused murmuring as residents processed information that shattered every assumption about suburban tranquility. Over the past 3 years, Sarah continued, her voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision, Your HOA board has collected $425,000 in fraudulent special assessments for repairs that were never performed, funneling that money to shell companies owned by board members' family. Tom Buckley stood up, financial evidence ready for public presentation. I have documentation proving every claim Marshall Morrison just made, invoices for phantom work, insurance claims for damage that never existed, and payments to construction companies that exist only on paper. Karen's face cycled through colors that don't appear in nature as her carefully constructed authority crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. This is all lies, administrative errors, accounting mistakes. Then perhaps, Sarah replied with devastating calm, you can explain these insurance claims for storm damage that never occurred. She produced photographs of the community center roof, unchanged since construction, alongside insurance documentation showing $85,000 in fraudulent claims. The evidence landed in the room's collective consciousness like bombs detonating in slow motion. Margaret Riley stood up, her voice carrying the steel of someone who'd survived worse than suburban bullies. Karen told me personally that residents who couldn't afford special assessments should find more appropriate housing. She's been systematically driving families away to increase her real estate commissions. The crowd's energy shifted from confusion to growing anger as residents realized they'd been funding Karen's criminal enterprise disguised as community governance. That's when the federal cavalry arrived. The community center doors opened to admit 3 agents in tactical gear bearing U.S. Marshal patches, their presence transforming neighborhood meeting into federal crime scene. Sarah's colleagues moved with practiced efficiency, positioning themselves strategically while maintaining professional courtesy. Karen Whitfield, announced the lead agent consulting official paperwork, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit racketeering. The handcuffs clicked with metallic finality that echoed through absolute silence. Karen's protests about government overreach and innocent mistakes dissolved into incoherent babbling as federal agents recited Miranda rights that would define the rest of her life. Rick Whitfield, the second agent called toward the back of the room where Karen's brother-in-law was attempting to disappear into the crowd. You're also under arrest for conspiracy and fraud. Rick's attempt to flee ended in the parking lot with additional charges for evading federal agents, witnessed by every resident who'd ever paid his inflated invoices. As Karen was escorted past rows of neighbors she'd systematically victimized, Sarah delivered the mic drop moment that would echo through Pine Ridge Mountain community forever. Federal asset forfeiture will recover stolen funds for restitution to every resident who paid fraudulent assessments. Your community fees are about to decrease dramatically. The community center erupted in applause as Karen's criminal empire collapsed in real time, witnessed by local news crews who'd arrived to document the fall of a suburban dictator. Justice had arrived wearing federal badges, and Karen Whitfield's reign of financial terror was finally over. 3 months after Karen's perp walk became Pine Ridge legend, our mountain community had transformed from a neighborhood terrorized by petty tyranny into something resembling actual civilization. The crisp morning air smelled infinitely sweeter without diesel exhaust from Karen's daily intimidation patrols, and the sound of children's laughter had replaced the nervous whispers that used to follow HOA meetings like toxic fog. Tom Buckley won the emergency presidential election with a unanimous vote that lasted exactly 4 minutes and included actual applause. His first official act was implementing financial transparency requirements that would make future embezzlement about as likely as Karen developing humility. His second was ceremonially shredding every one of Karen's imaginary emergency bylaws and returning to actual Colorado legal requirements. Funny thing, Tom announced at our first post-Karen gathering, community governance works remarkably better when you follow real laws instead of manufacturing authority from thin air and wounded pride. Karen's legal downfall played out like Sarah's prosecutorial masterpiece. Confronted with federal evidence that could bury her for 2 decades, she pleaded guilty faster than a tourist fleeing mountain weather. 4 years federal prison, $425,000 restitution, and permanent banishment from any HOA position anywhere. Rick earned 18 months plus lifetime construction ban. Though honestly, his skills were questionable even when he wasn't actively committing felonies. Federal asset forfeiture recovered $380,000 from Karen's various luxury accounts, vehicles, and that Aspen vacation condo no legitimate HOA president could afford. Every resident received refund checks averaging $2,800, money stolen through fraudulent assessments and Karen's creative fee structure. The collective sigh of financial relief could probably be heard in neighboring counties. Sarah's takedown performance earned federal commendation and promotion to supervisory marshal, leading a specialized task force targeting suburban white-collar crime. Turns out Karen's operation was amateur hour compared to nationwide HOA fraud requiring federal intervention. Who knew so many criminal enterprises masquerade as community governance? Sarah mused, reviewing case files suggesting Karen was small potatoes in a much larger criminal ecosystem. My furniture business exploded after neighborhood word of mouth turned standing up to corruption into excellent marketing. Half of Pine Ridge hired me for legitimate improvements, and referrals from satisfied customers had me booked 3 months ahead. Apparently, integrity and actual craftsmanship constitute powerful business strategies. The recovered funds enabled something Karen's greed had prevented for years: legitimate community improvements. We established the Pine Ridge Community Scholarship, awarding $10,000 annually to local students studying criminal justice, accounting, or public administration. The cosmic irony of Karen's crimes funding future crime fighters felt like justice with a sense of humor. Monthly community meetings became potluck dinners where neighbors actually enjoyed each other's company instead of enduring manufactured drama. The scent of homemade casseroles and genuine friendship replaced the stale coffee and fear that had defined Karen's meetings. Our community garden project, planted on formerly contested common ground, now produces vegetables feeding families instead of Karen's bank accounts. Margaret Riley coordinates the scholarship program, channeling 40 years of paralegal experience into mentoring young people determined to protect communities from predators. Justice delayed isn't always justice denied, she observed with hard-earned wisdom. Sometimes it's justice with compound interest. The ripple effects spread beyond Pine Ridge like wildfire through dry timber. 3 neighboring HOAs requested financial audits after hearing our story. Sarah's task force discovered and prosecuted 2 additional fraud schemes involving over $2 million in stolen community funds across Colorado. Our property finally felt like home instead of battlefield. Summer evenings on the deck carry children's laughter and backyard barbecue smoke instead of tension and diesel fumes. The sweet scent of pine needles mixed with genuine community celebration has replaced the toxic atmosphere Karen's corruption had poisoned our mountain paradise with for years. Sarah's federal cases keep her traveling, but now neighbors wave enthusiastically instead of avoiding eye contact when she returns. Being married to someone who professionally destroys financial predators turns out to be outstanding for neighborhood credibility and property values. This past Christmas, Pine Ridge glowed with lights reflecting genuine joy instead of the darkness Karen's reign had cast over families. Children sledded hills where residents used to whisper about escape plans, and neighbors gathered for celebrations instead of emergency meetings about imaginary crises. The lesson echoes through every conversation. Ordinary citizens can defeat institutional corruption through organization, documentation, and refusing intimidation from bullies who mistake temporary authority for permanent immunity. Here's where HOA Stories needs your help. Drop your worst HOA nightmare in the comments below because I read every single story, and some might need federal attention. Smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because we're just getting started exposing corruption one neighborhood at a time. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's justice, community healing, and ensuring bullies never terrorize innocent families again. Karen learned that lesson the hard way, and her 4-year federal vacation gives her plenty of time to reflect on it.
That's all for today's HOA Madness. If watching justice serve itself made your day, smash that like button, share your thoughts down below, and make sure you're subscribed. More outrageous neighborhood showdowns are just around the corner.